everyone, and welcome to another video from the Tiny Menagerie. Now, I am a big fan of snails in fish tanks. They clean up any uneaten food, they keep soft and surface algae to an absolute minimum, and they can be really quite pretty in their own right. But they do tend to come with a rather serious caveat, which is that in the right situation, they breed like crazy. Also, some snail species have the ability to reproduce asexually, so they only need one, while others are hermaphrodites, so while it takes two to tango, both will then go off and lay eggs. Combine this with a snail's rapid growth rate in a well-fed tank, and you can almost just sit back and watch the population explode. While I like snails, I don't like seeing them coating every surface, and I certainly don't like that they can easily outcompete shrimp for food. And so, once they reach what I would like to think of as plague proportions in the tank, it is time to do something to reduce that population down a little bit. And the first way to get rid of pest snails is to avoid them in the first place. Not many people will go out of their way to buy pest snails, such as bladder snails or flat snails. Instead, they tend to come along as hitchhikers. Although, just to point out, I actually did buy my pink ram's horns, which certainly qualify as a pest snail. But there are a few ways you can avoid adding snails to your tank, and firstly, try to only ever buy perfectly dry hardscapes such as wood or rocks. No aquatic snail can survive being out of the water, which is why you never find them out and about exploring around your house. They always stay firmly in the tank. Some will come out briefly to lay their eggs away from nibbling fish, but they quickly return to the water to prevent themselves from drying out and dying. And so, as long as any wood or rockwork that you're buying is perfectly dry, then there will be no surviving snails on it. If that's not possible, perhaps you've fallen in love with a piece of hardscaping in a shop that's already in use, and they're willing to fish it out of their display tanks for you, then you will need to boil said hardscape prior to using it in your tank. This doesn't need to be for very long, just a quick dip for a minute or so is plenty to kill off any snails, as nothing can survive boiling temperatures. And if your hardscape is too large for a pot, then you can pour boiling water over it slowly to make sure you cover every surface and that it has enough time to heat up enough to kill the snails. Plants, on the other hand, though, are obviously a lot more challenging to remove snails from, as certainly pouring boiling water onto your plants is going to kill them just as fast as it does the snails. You can buy plants which are certified snail and algae free, such as Tropica's 1-2 grow pots. These are grown in laboratory conditions and have never been in contact with aquarium soil or even aquarium water for that matter, and they are perfectly safe to start off in your tank as soon as you get them, as they have absolutely no chance of being infested with snails. The only issue here is that you are very limited to the type of plants that you can be bought like this, and as they are very small when you get them, they can be a little bit challenging to get established in your tank. Other than grow pots though, I am very wary of any plants that claim to be snail-free, as they tend to have been treated with chemicals which will kill all of your shrimp just as fast as they killed the snails. Which is actually another way of getting rid of pest snails. You can use snail-killing chemicals in your tank. You can purchase dips or tank-wide treatments on the internet, and these will kill all of the snails in the tank along with any other crustaceans as well. This is especially true for tank-wide treatments, which tend to be copper-based, and so they are incredibly persistent and pernicious, meaning they last a very long time and they will slowly kill almost anything in the tank. And in all honesty, in my humble opinion, they shouldn't exist, and they certainly should never actually be used in a home aquarium. They're just not needed, and they do so much damage, they should only be used as an absolute last resort. And so though, assuming you already have snails in your tank and you don't want to go down the chemical route, how else can you get rid of them? Well, first and perhaps the most obvious way is to manually remove them. Long-handled tweezers are perfect for the job and allow you to reach right down to the tank to pick off all of the largest individuals. This is best done first thing in the morning after you switch the lights on, as the snails will still be active after feeding overnight, giving you time to take them off the glass before they hide themselves away. If you remove all of the largest snails, just the ones you can easily get to, you will slowly reduce their numbers and their ability to breed, as you'll be taking away the adults. This does take time, but it is by far the least disruptive method of removing them from your tank. Where this method fails, though, is that you will struggle to pick up any of the teeny tiny snails, such as immature ram's horns or even adult flat snails, as they're just too delicate and they're likely to be crushed when you grab hold of them. In very small numbers, this isn't really a problem. If you have shrimp in the tank, in fact, they really relish eating squashed snails. But if you're trying to remove a large number in this way, then you do run the risk of the dead snails rotting in the tank and causing an ammonia spike. And so instead, you might want to try using snail traps. These can be purchased on places like Amazon if you're feeling flush, but I have found by far the most effective trap to be the classic hollowed out courgette. Snails love these, and they will migrate to them to feed on the soft, fleshy inner bit. And if you leave the courgette upside down in the tank, then it also creates a dark, safe space where the baby snails will try to hide. Then it is simply a case of leaving the courgette in the tank overnight, and in the morning flipping it over and removing it from the tank. It will have snails clustered all around the outsides trying to eat it, and hopefully there'll be lots of little ones in there as well. These can then be gently washed or rubbed off, and then the trap replaced, ready to catch the next batch the following night. These traps are really effective and can be used to rapidly reduce the population of snails, and because courgettes are quite tough, they will last for a good week in the tank, or they need to be replaced. And traps, of course, may be your only choice if you have either a very large tank that is simply impossible to get round with a pair of tweezers, or if you have a huge overpopulation of snails that is just completely out of hand. And your other option, of course, is to stock your tank with fish that will happily consume your snail population for you. Many of the loaches will happily consume snails. Some of these, such as the clown loach, do get very large, but the smaller ones, such as yo-yo loaches, are much more reasonable for a smaller, say, 100-litre aquarium. Dwarf gourami are also fantastic snail hunters, and the smaller honeys can live in a tank of about 40 litres, happily munching their way through any of the young snails that they encounter. And a pretty good sign that your fish have been snacking on the snails is you will start to see piles of empty shells on the substrate. Pea puffers are another well-known voracious eater of snails, and in fact snails can make up the majority of their diet. If you do keep pea puffers though, you will probably have to start buying snails in for them at some point, unless you have any luck being able to transition them onto an easier staple diet such as pelleted carnivore food. Just remember as well though, that any fish that eats snails will probably eat shrimp as well, and it will definitely eat shrimplets. And also, just like with anything else in the animal world, they can be a little bit unpredictable. Just because it says on the tin or on a YouTube video that a certain species will eat snails doesn't mean that your particular fish will. Especially not if there is plenty of much easier and more nutritious fish food about the place. Certainly my gourami were all fantastic snail eaters in the beginning, and they've now all decided that they'd much rather just wait around for me to feed them rather than go hunting for themselves. My better, on the other hand, is still a voracious consumer of snails. And he is single-handedly keeping the entire population in this rather large tank in check. Just a quick side note on assassin snails. Don't even try it. Assassin snails are just as likely to overpopulate your tank as any other species of snail, and being carnivorous, they are much more difficult to remove with bait traps. Buying a snail to fix a snail is a recipe for disaster. But it is very likely that in your quest to keep the snail population at a manageable level, you will have to utilise more than one of the above methods. And certainly I have found that manual removal along with traps is all that I need to keep the population in check. I have enough snails in the tanks to keep them looking clean, but not so many that they're becoming an eyesore or a nuisance. But you use in your own tank is going to be very much a case of how big is your tank versus how much time can you dedicate to snail removal. Anywho though, I hope you've enjoyed this little video all about controlling pest snail populations. Happy fish keeping everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye!